Rain hammered the Seattle port like bullets hitting concrete. The drops came down so hard, I had to squint just to see the crane lights blinking through the storm. I sat in my truck, engine off, letting the noise fill the silence. My phone lit up again. 23 missed calls from the office, all in the last 2 hours. I stared at those numbers and couldn't help but smile because I knew exactly what was happening back there. And it was about time. My name is Henry Sullivan. I'm 58 years old, and I've been running operations at Tacoma Port for 15 years. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Marines. Learned how to lead people and get things done right after my wife Clara died in that car accident 5 years ago. It's just been me and my 17-year-old son, Liam. This job has been everything to us. But to understand why I'm sitting here watching my phone blow up while my coworkers panic, I need to go back 3 days to the meeting that changed everything. The conference room on the second floor had that stale air that comes from too many bad decisions made behind closed doors. I walked in expecting the usual annual review. After 15 years, I figured I'd earned the operations director position that opened up when Gary retired. My track record spoke for itself. 0 major accidents on my watch, efficiency ratings consistently above target, and respect from every worker on the floor. Wallace Ford sat at the head of the table. New guy brought in 6 months ago to modernize operations. The kind of manager who uses words like synergy and paradigm shift in every sentence. Next to him was his son Bryce, 26 years old, fresh MBA from some prestigious school, designer suit that probably cost more than most of my guys made in a week. And that look kids get when they think they know everything about nothing. Wallace didn't waste time with small talk. Henry, I've reviewed your performance. You're solid, reliable, but I don't think you meet the qualifications for the director position. The words hit like a sucker punch after 15 years of making sure this place ran like clockwork, keeping workers safe, handling every crisis that came through those doors. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I got in Kandahar when the CO told us our supply convoy was delayed and we'd have to make do with what we had. What qualifications am I missing? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Military training teaches you not to let emotions drive the conversation. We need fresh thinking, innovation. Bryce here has some exciting ideas about streamlining operations, cutting redundancies. Wallace smiled like he was doing me a favor. He'll be taking the director position. Starting salary will be 20% above your current rate. But don't worry, you'll be working closely with him. Your experience will be valuable in helping him implement changes. I looked at Bryce. Kid was nodding like a dashboard bobblehead, probably calculating how good this would look on his resume. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about Liam's college applications sitting on my kitchen table, the tuition bills coming next year, the promotion I'd been counting on to help us get through without draining my retirement savings. What kind of streamlining? I asked. Bryce leaned forward, eager to show off. Well, we've identified several redundancies in the current safety protocols. Too many checkpoints, too much documentation. We can cut inspection times by 30% and increase throughput significantly. I felt my jaw tighten. This kid was talking about cutting safety protocols like he was trimming fat from a budget spreadsheet. These weren't numbers on a screen. They were procedures that kept people from getting crushed by 40-ton containers or electrocuted by crane systems. But what Bryce didn't know was that the safety protocol he just bypassed wasn't just company policy. It was a proprietary stabilization algorithm I had developed and patented on my own time under 35 U.S.C. paragraph 271. They had been using it under a precarious implied license that vanished the moment they deviated from its explicit operational guidelines. Those redundancies, I said slowly, they exist because this is dangerous work. Every checkpoint catches something the previous one might have missed. That's old school thinking, Bryce replied with the confidence only someone who'd never seen a workplace accident could have. Modern efficiency standards show that streamlined processes actually increase safety by reducing complexity. I looked at Wallace. You're putting someone in charge of operations who's never worked a day on the floor. Bryce has an MBA from Northwestern and 2 years of consulting experience with operational optimization. He brings exactly the kind of fresh perspective we need. That's when I understood what was really happening. This wasn't about qualifications or fresh thinking. This was about Wallace setting his kid up with a cushy management position, and I was supposed to do the actual work while Bryce took the credit and the salary. But here's what they didn't know about me. Marines don't argue when the situation is clear. We adapt, we observe, and when the time is right, we act. I stood up, gave them both a polite nod. Well then, I guess we'll see how those innovations work out. I walked out before Wallace could launch into his speech about exciting new directions and collaborative leadership opportunities. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Liam doing his homework across from me. College brochures spread between us: Washington State, University of Oregon, Seattle University. All expensive, all requiring the kind of financial commitment that my current salary could barely handle, let alone support. "Dad, you okay? You look like someone stole your truck," Liam said, looking up from his calculus homework. "Just thinking about work stuff, son. The promotion thing?" Smart kid. I'd mentioned it a few weeks ago when the position opened up. Yeah, didn't get it. Nope. Went to someone else. Liam set down his pencil. Someone with more experience. I almost laughed. Someone with an MBA and a famous last name. "That's garbage, Dad. You know that port better than anyone." Out of the mouths of teenagers. Sometimes knowing how to do the job isn't enough, Liam. Sometimes it's about who you know. "So, what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I'd spent 15 years being the guy everyone came to when things went wrong, the one who stayed late to fix problems, came in early to prevent them, and worked weekends when crisis hit. I'd been carrying this place on my back, and they just told me I wasn't qualified to officially do what I'd been doing all along. I pulled out my job description, the actual one, not the expanded version I'd been living by. Really read it for the first time in years. "Dad, yeah, son. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. You've always done right by people. Smart kid, smarter than his old man sometimes." That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain against the windows, I made my decision. I was going to do exactly what they asked me to do, nothing more, nothing less. Just my job as written, performed to the letter. Sometimes the best way to prove your worth isn't to argue about it. Sometimes you just have to step back and let people see what happens when you're not there to catch everything that falls. I showed up Monday morning at exactly 8 a.m. Not 6:30 like usual, not early enough to check the overnight reports, handle the equipment issues, or brief the morning crew on potential problems. Just 8 a.m. sharp like my job description specified. The parking lot felt different at that hour. Quieter. Most of the early shift was already deep into their routines. The routines I'd helped establish over 15 years of being there before everyone else. But not today. I walked past the main operations board where Hector Diaz, our shift supervisor, was staring at a stack of overnight incident reports, with the kind of confusion you see when someone's trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Henry, thank God you're here," he said, not looking up. "We've got a mess from the night shift. Crane 7's hydraulics are acting up again. The manifest system crashed around midnight, and there's some kind of documentation error on the Pacific Express containers that came in at 0400. I checked my watch, then pulled out my job description, the actual one I'd printed and highlighted the night before. That's maintenance department for the hydraulics. Submit a work order. It handles system crashes, and documentation errors go through the quality control office. Hector looked at me like I'd started speaking Chinese. "But you always handle the hydraulics issue. You know that system better than maintenance does." "Not according to my official responsibilities." "Henry, what's going on? You feeling okay?" The truth was, I felt better than I had in months. Clearer. For 15 years, I'd been carrying the weight of 3 different departments because it was easier than watching things fall apart. But that weight had a cost. Nights when I came home exhausted, weekends spent thinking about work problems, the constant stress of being the person everyone expected to have all the answers. "I'm fine, Hector, just following proper procedures." I headed to my desk and started on my actual assigned tasks. Container routing schedules for my designated zones, safety compliance documentation for my specific areas of responsibility, equipment inspection reports for the machinery under my direct supervision. It was strange how quiet my phone was. Usually by 8:30, I'd have fielded a dozen calls about problems that weren't technically mine, but that I'd solve anyway because it kept things moving. Today, silence. Around 9:15, Bryce showed up for his first day as operations director. Fresh haircut, new hard hat that still had the stickers on it, and a leather portfolio that looked like it cost more than most of my tools. He made a beeline for my desk. "Henry, good morning, Henry. Ready for an exciting day of operational improvements?" "Morning, Bryce. What can I help you with?" "Well, I wanted to start by reviewing our current efficiency metrics and identifying areas for immediate optimization." I gestured to my computer screen. "My efficiency reports are all up to date. Everything's in the system." "Great. And what about the overall operational status? Any issues from the overnight shift?" "You'd need to check with the night shift supervisor for that information." "I wasn't here." Bryce's smile faltered just a bit. "But don't you usually? I mean, Wallace mentioned you typically handle the transition briefings. That was something I did voluntarily. It's not part of my official duties." "Oh, okay. Well, who should I talk to about the hydraulics issue with Crane 7? "Hector mentioned it's been ongoing. Maintenance department. Diego Cruz is the hydraulics specialist and the manifest system problems. IT department. Clara Parker handles database issues, the documentation errors, quality control. That would be Oliver Grant's area." Bryce was scribbling notes frantically, his confidence evaporating with each answer. "This is more compartmentalized than I expected." Most operations are when you follow the organizational chart. What Bryce was discovering, what his MBA program apparently hadn't taught him, was the difference between how organizations work on paper and how they work in reality. On paper, every department had clear responsibilities and clean handoff procedures. In reality, most places only function because people like me spend their careers bridging the gaps between what departments are supposed to do and what actually needs to get done. By 10:30, the cracks were starting to show. I watched from my desk as Bryce bounced between departments trying to get answers about problems that required the kind of institutional knowledge you don't learn from org charts. Hector came by my desk around 11, looking frustrated. "Henry, Bryce asked me about the morning delay protocol." I told him it's not written down anywhere, that you just handle it based on weather and shipping schedules. "Sounds like something the operations director should document then. But you know that protocol better than anyone. You created it." "I did on my own time based on my own experience. Never got asked to make it official policy." Hector stared at me for a long moment. "This is about the promotion, isn't it? This is about doing my job. Nothing more, nothing less." Around noon, the first real crisis hit. Rodriguez from the loading dock called in. One of the new guys had tried to move a container without following proper spotting procedures. And now we had a 20-ton container sitting at an angle on the dock, blocking access to 3 other units that were supposed to ship out on the afternoon tide. My phone rang. It was Bryce. "Henry, we have a situation on Dock 7. Can you come take a look? Is it in my designated zone?" What? "Dock 7 is managed by the West Operations team. I handle East Operations, but this is urgent. We need someone with experience." "Then you should contact the West Operations supervisor." "That's Carmen Vega." "Carmen's at lunch. We need someone now." I looked at my job description again. My lunch break starts in 10 minutes. "You'll need to wait for Carmen to return or handle it yourself." The silence on the phone stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, "Fine, I'll figure it out." I went to lunch at exactly noon like my schedule said. The cafeteria had a view of the docks, and I could see Bryce down there with a cluster of workers, all of them looking up at the tilted container like it was some kind of puzzle they couldn't solve. Rodriguez waved at me through the window. "Good guy, been here 8 years. Learned proper procedures the hard way. He knew what needed to be done, call in the heavy equipment, use the stabilizer chains, coordinate with the crane operator to lift and reset the container. Basic stuff. But it required someone with authority to make the call." I ate my sandwich and watched Bryce make phone calls. Probably trying to reach Wallace or maybe calling Carmen to see when she'd be back from lunch. What he should have been doing was taking charge, making the call, accepting responsibility. But that's the thing about people who've never been in actual leadership positions. They think leadership is about having the right answer, when really it's about making decisions with incomplete information and living with the consequences. By 12:30, they'd gotten the container situation sorted out. Carmen had come back from lunch early and handled it in about 10 minutes. But those 30 minutes of delay would cascade through the afternoon shipping schedule, creating problems that someone would have to solve. That someone used to be me. Today it would be whoever was officially responsible. When I got back from lunch, Bryce was waiting at my desk. His hard hat was crooked, his shirt was sweaty, and he looked like a man who was beginning to understand the difference between theory and practice. "Henry, I need to ask you something." "Sure, how did you learn all this stuff?" "The protocols, the procedures, the relationships with all the different departments, 15 years of showing up early, staying late, and caring more about getting things done than about whose job it technically was." He nodded slowly. "Wallace mentioned you'd be helping me transition into the role. I'm happy to answer questions during my scheduled consultation hours." Consultation hours. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 to 4:00 p.m. You can book time through the administrative assistant. Bryce stared at me like I'd told him the port was moving to Mars. "But what if there's an emergency?" "Then you handle it. That's what directors do." That afternoon, I watched the port struggle with the kind of small problems that I'd been solving invisibly for years. Nothing catastrophic, just the daily friction that accumulates when systems don't quite fit together the way they should. Bryce spent most of his time on phone calls, trying to coordinate responses to issues that could have been prevented with a little foresight and institutional knowledge. At 5 p.m. exactly, I shut down my computer, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the parking lot. As I walked past the operations center, I could see Bryce still there, surrounded by papers and looking overwhelmed. Liam was waiting for me when I got home, college applications spread across the kitchen table. "How was the new job dynamic, Dad?" "Educational," I said, "for everyone involved. Think they're learning anything? We'll see. Sometimes people need to feel the weight of responsibility before they understand what it means to carry it." Liam looked up from his essay. "You know, Mr. Peterson at school says the best teachers don't give you the answers. They let you figure out the questions." Smart kid. Definitely getting that from his mother's side. Tuesday morning brought our first real test. I arrived at 8 a.m. to find the oversupervisor's report sitting on my desk with a red flag attached. The international symbol for somebody screwed up and we need the cavalry. The report was 3 pages long, but the important part was in the first paragraph. Crane 7's hydraulic system had finally given up completely around 3 a.m. The night crew had tried to jury-rig a temporary fix using the backup system, but without proper authorization for the repair protocol, they just shut it down and flagged it for the morning shift. Crane 7 was our heavy lift unit, the one we used for the oversized containers that couldn't be handled by the standard equipment. And according to the shipping manifest, we had 12 oversized units coming in on the Pacific Express. Due to dock at 10 a.m., my phone started ringing at 8:15. "Hector, Henry, we've got a problem. Crane 7's down and we've got heavy containers coming in. What do you want me to do?" I pulled up the equipment assignments on my computer. "Crane 7 isn't in my operational zone, Hector. That's West Dock equipment, but you know the backup procedures better than anyone." "You wrote half of them. I wrote them on my own time as suggestions. They were never officially adopted as policy. Come on, Henry. We need that crane operational in 2 hours. Then you need to contact maintenance and the West Dock supervisor. I'm sure they'll figure it out." The silence on the line told me everything I needed to know. Hector was realizing what Bryce had started to understand yesterday, that the unofficial system they'd been relying on was built entirely on my willingness to work outside my assigned responsibilities. At 8:30, Bryce called. "Henry, I need you to take a look at the Crane 7 situation. The maintenance team says they need operational input before they can proceed with repairs. I'm scheduled for consultation hours Thursday afternoon. You can book a slot. This can't wait until Thursday. We've got a ship coming in. Then you'll need to handle it yourself or find someone else with the appropriate authority. But I don't know the technical specifications. Neither did I when I started here 15 years ago. I learned by asking questions and reading manuals." Another long silence. Finally, "Where are the manuals?" "Equipment library, 3rd floor." Check them out from Janet in technical documentation. I hung up and went back to my assigned tasks, but I kept one eye on the west dock through my office window. Bryce was down there with a clipboard, a couple of maintenance guys, and what looked like a thick manual he was flipping through like he was searching for buried treasure. At 9:15, I heard the emergency horn from the harbor. 3 long blasts followed by 2 short ones. That was the signal for an incoming ship, requesting priority docking due to weather conditions. The Pacific Express was coming in early, trying to beat a storm system that was moving up the coast. Bryce's clipboard session turned into a frantic conference. I could see him on his phone, probably calling Wallace for guidance that Wallace wasn't qualified to give. The maintenance crew stood around, looking like they were waiting for someone to make a decision they were authorized to make. At 9:45, they made the call to attempt repairs on Crane 7 using the secondary hydraulic system. It was the right technical decision, but it required someone with operational authority to sign off on the safety protocols, someone like an operations director. I watched Bryce sign the paperwork with the kind of nervous energy you see in people who are betting with money they can't afford to lose. The Pacific Express docked at 10:20, 20 minutes late, but still within acceptable parameters. The first 8 containers came off without incident using the standard cranes. Then they reached the oversized units. Container number 4471 was a 40 FT refrigerated unit loaded with frozen seafood bound for the East Coast. Weight 38 tons. The kind of load that requires precise coordination between the crane operator, the ground crew, and the dock supervisor. Diego Cruz was operating Crane 7. Good worker, 6 years experience, but he'd never worked with the secondary hydraulic system. Under normal circumstances, I would have been down there, walking him through the process, explaining the differences in lift speed and load capacity, making sure everyone understood the modified safety protocols. Instead, I was in my office completing my assigned paperwork while Bryce supervised the operation armed with a technical manual and 2 days of director experience. The first sign of trouble was the sound, a high-pitched whine from the hydraulic system that meant the pressure was running higher than optimal. The second sign was the way the container swayed during the initial lift, a subtle oscillation that suggested the load wasn't properly balanced. I stood up from my desk and moved to the window. This was going to go bad, and I could see it happening in real time. Container 44471 cleared the ship and started its swing toward the dock. Standard procedure called for a slow, controlled movement with multiple checkpoints to ensure load stability. But the secondary hydraulic system operated at different pressure levels than the primary system, which meant different lift speeds and different response times for operator inputs. Diego compensated for the slower response by overcorrecting his movements. The container began to oscillate more severely. Bryce was on his radio, probably asking Diego to steady the load. But from my vantage point, I could see the fundamental problem. They were using equipment they didn't fully understand to perform an operation they weren't properly trained for. The cable snapped at 10:47 a.m. 38 tons of frozen seafood dropped 15 feet and hit Dock 7 like a bomb. The impact sent Rodriguez, who'd been working the guidelines, scrambling backward. But the secondary impact, the container bouncing and rolling, caught him in the leg. The emergency horn started immediately, long continuous blast that meant injury on the dock. All operations cease. Emergency response teams deploy. I was already moving before the horn finished its first cycle. Military training kicks in when people are hurt. You respond first, worry about protocols later. But I stopped myself at the office door. Rodriguez was down, Bryce was in over his head, and the entire West Dock operation was shut down. But this wasn't my zone. This wasn't my responsibility. This was what happened when you put someone in charge of operations they didn't understand and cut these safety redundancies they thought were unnecessary. I watched through my window as the paramedics worked on Rodriguez, conscious, talking, probably just a broken leg, but it could have been worse. A lot worse. My phone was ringing non-stop now. Wallace, the Port Authority, insurance investigators, OSHA, everyone wanting to know what happened, who was responsible, and what our response plan was. I let it ring. At 11:30, Wallace showed up at my office door. No knock, no greeting, just a man in panic mode. Henry, I need you down there now. Need me for what? The OSHA investigator wants to interview someone with operational knowledge about the accident. Bryce has been trying to explain our procedures, but he doesn't know our procedures. That's not, look, this is a crisis. We need all hands. I looked at him calmly. My hands are busy with my assigned responsibilities. If you need operational expertise for the investigation, you'll need to assign that task to someone with the appropriate authority. Wallace's face went red. You're the senior operations person. No, I'm not. Bryce is the operations director. I'm senior operations supervisor, East Division. The accident happened in West Division. This is about the promotion, isn't it? Fine. You want to talk about a raise, a title change? We can discuss it after we get through this crisis. I shook my head. This isn't about money, Wallace. This is about competence. You put someone in charge of operations who doesn't understand the job. Told him to cut safety procedures to improve efficiency. And now someone's in the hospital. That's not a personnel issue. That's a leadership failure. By appointing an unqualified family member and deliberately circumventing established safety protocols, Wallace wasn't just making a bad management decision. He was committing a textbook breach of fiduciary duty, exposing the entire board to personal liability. Wallace stood in my doorway for a long moment, probably running through his options. Finally, what do you want? I want you to handle the crisis you created. With the director you appointed and the procedures he recommended, Wallace left without another word. Through my window, I could see him heading back to the cluster of officials and investigators surrounding the accident scene. Bryce was there with his clipboard and his manual, trying to answer questions about procedures he was learning as he went. Rodriguez was on his way to the hospital. The West Dock was closed indefinitely. Container 44701 was leaking seafood juice across 200 square feet of concrete. The Port Authority was already drafting emergency closure notices. If the docks shut down for more than a week, they would trigger the Warren Act, 29 U.S.C. 2101, requiring 60-day notices for mass layoffs and opening the company to catastrophic federal penalties. And somewhere in the Port Authority building, people were making decisions about whether Tacoma Port was competent enough to handle major shipping contracts. My phone showed 47 missed calls. I went to lunch. That afternoon, I sat in my truck in the parking lot watching the rain and those 47 missed calls. The storm had gotten worse, turning the port into something that looked like a disaster movie set. But the real disaster wasn't the weather. It was happening in the conference rooms, where people were trying to explain how a simple container operation had turned into an OSHA investigation and a worker in the hospital. Liam texted me around 2 p.m. Ident, come home when you can. Made your favorite chili and cornbread. Smart kid. He knew when his old man needed comfort food. My phone rang again. This time it was Patricia Owens from the Port Authority Board. Not Wallace, not Bryce, but the woman who actually made decisions about the future of this place. Henry, we need you in the emergency board meeting. Now, ma'am, I'm off duty. If this is work-related, you'll need to contact my supervisor. Your supervisor is part of the problem, Henry. We need someone who understands how this port actually operates. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the same desperation Wallace had been hiding behind his corporate speak all week. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The boardroom was packed like a courtroom on the day of a verdict. Port Authority members, union representatives, insurance investigators, OSHA officials, and shipping company executives on speakerphone. Wallace sat at the table looking like a man watching his career get fed into a wood chipper. Bryce was conspicuously absent, probably at the hospital getting his story straight with lawyers. Patricia Owens called the meeting to order. We're here to determine whether Tacoma Port can continue operations under current management or if we need to implement emergency oversight. The Pacific Express representative spoke from the phone. We've been shipping through this port for 8 years without a major incident. Now we have one worker hospitalized and millions of dollars in damaged cargo. We need assurance that safety protocols are adequate and operational efficiency can be maintained. All eyes turned to Wallace. He cleared his throat, shuffled through a stack of papers that probably contained every business school buzzword ever invented, and started talking about comprehensive reviews and systematic improvements. Pure nonsense designed to fill time while he figured out how to save his job. The OSHA investigator cut him off. Mr. Williams, our preliminary findings suggest that modified safety procedures contributed to this accident. Can you explain the rationale behind reducing crane operation checkpoints? Wallace looked like a deer in headlights. Those modifications were recommended by our new operations director as part of our efficiency initiatives. And where is this operations director? Bryce is handling the immediate response to the incident. Translation. Bryce was hiding somewhere, trying to figure out how to spin this disaster into something that wasn't his fault. Patricia Owens leaned forward. Henry, you've been here 15 years. Walk us through what happened. I stood up and pulled out the folder I'd prepared during lunch. 3 days of documentation about every failure, every missed protocol, every gap in knowledge that had emerged since I'd stepped back from unofficial responsibilities. The accident was preventable, I said simply. It resulted from 3 critical failures: inadequate equipment knowledge, modified safety procedures, and insufficient operational oversight. I walked them through the timeline, how Crane 7's hydraulic issues had been flagged for weeks, but never properly addressed. Because the person who understood the system wasn't officially responsible for it. How Bryce's efficiency improvements had eliminated redundant safety checks that existed specifically to prevent load stability issues. How the accident happened because someone with theoretical knowledge tried to supervise an operation that required practical experience. The fundamental problem isn't equipment failure or worker error, I continued. It's a management structure that prioritizes credentials over competence and efficiency over safety. Wallace tried to interrupt. Our new operational model was designed to streamline processes and improve productivity. Sir, with respect, your operational model was designed by someone who's never operated a crane, never supervised a loading dock, and never had to explain to someone's family why they didn't come home from work. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the rain against the windows and the distant sound of tugboat horns from the harbor. The insurance investigators spoke up. Mr. Sullivan, what would it take to restore operational safety and efficiency? Complete documentation of all safety procedures, mandatory hands-on training for all supervisory personnel, and operational oversight by someone with actual field experience, not just MBA theory. Patricia Owens nodded. Would you be willing to take on that oversight role? I looked around the room at Wallace, who was staring at his hands like they contained the answers to questions he'd never thought to ask. At the union rep, who was nodding approval, at the faces of people who were finally understanding that running a port wasn't the same as running a spreadsheet. I'd need full authority over safety protocols and operational procedures. I'd need the operations director position with real decision-making power, not advisory input. And I'd need compensation that reflects the responsibility. Wallace finally looked up. Henry, I'm sure we can work something out. Sir, this isn't a negotiation with you anymore. Patricia Owens smiled for the first time all day. Henry, the board is prepared to offer you the operations director position. Full authority over safety and operational procedures. 25% salary increase effective immediately, plus back-pay adjustment for the responsibilities you've been handling unofficially. I nodded once. I can work with that. The Pacific Express representative spoke from the phone. If Mr. Sullivan is taking operational control, we're prepared to continue our contract relationship and increase our shipping volume by 15%. Wallace stood up slowly. What about Bryce? Bryce can start as a trainee in the East Division, I said. Learn crane operations, dock procedures, and safety protocols. If he's serious about port management, he'll need to understand what he's managing from the ground up. In my position, Patricia Owens answered that one. Wallace, you'll be transitioning to special projects coordination effective immediately. 3 weeks later, I'm sitting in my actual office, the one with the window that overlooks both the east and west docks, watching the port run the way it's supposed to, smooth, safe, efficient. No emergency horns, no panicked phone calls, no last-minute heroics to prevent disasters that should never have been disasters in the first place. Bryce shows up every morning at 7 a.m. now, wearing work boots instead of designer shoes, learning crane operations and safety procedures from the ground up. Turns out when you strip away the entitlement and force him to start from the bottom, he's actually not a bad kid. Just needed someone to teach him the difference between reading about leadership and actually leading people. Rodriguez is back at work, leg healed, with a story that gets more dramatic every time he tells it. The West Dock is running better than ever, and the safety protocols we've implemented are being adopted as industry standards. Wallace found a position with a consulting firm downtown, probably for the best.